I'm going to give us a couple of moments just to make sure that everyone has been joined in appropriately. Good afternoon. Thank you again. This is the housing breakout session of the Thinking, Learning, and Doing in the New Normal Virtual Summit. I'd like to welcome everyone to our session, and hopefully we would like to encourage a discussion on housing affordability, accessibility, and even if we have a little time, talk about how COVID has impacted the housing industry here in Indianapolis. I would first like to introduce everyone. Understand this is our second breakout session. We met this morning. We have learned some things from this morning, how to make sure this is a little bit more efficient and effective for everyone. So I want to introduce our panel, and we will not talk as much as we did the first time. We're just going to introduce ourselves, tell what organization we're with, what is our product, and then minimize how we got into this industry. So, Mr. Gary Hobbs, will you start, please?
Yeah, sure. Gary Hobbs, President, CEO of BWI. We're a full-service affordable housing developer, property management, construction company.
And how did you get into this business?
Oh, well, I got into it after leaving corporate America in 2005, had the entrepreneurial itch, and started buying single family homes. Market crashed, and then stumbled literally into multifamily kind of at the right time and right place.
Thank you. Mr. Hawthorne.
Okay, Robert Hawthorne, Executive Director of the, I did already say Martindale Brightwood. I'm so used to saying that. Of the West Side Community Development Corporation. I've been there since 2018. We're a housing, commercial, and community building organization. I got into this because my family's been in it for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to work with the Martindale Brightwood area early on and get an opportunity to start that organization. And basically have been doing not-for-profit management ever since, but a good portion that has been housing development.
Thank you. Lee.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Lee Riley Evans. I serve as the Director of Community Development for Eastern Star Jewel Human Services Corporation, where we're responsible for demonstrating love lived out through our community. And I came into this business just with an interest to continue to bring people together, to serve as a connector and to improve access and equity in the community.
Thank you. Mr. Broadnax.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Broadnax with Sanair. We are a low-income housing tax credit investor. So I'm a Senior Vice President for Business Development for both Indiana and Illinois. And I got into this business as a graduated intern at Ball State University College of Architecture and Planning when I started off as an intern at a CDC called Industry Neighborhood Council. Later on, went up to be the director. Went on to work for a short time for the Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership, and then also for the Indianapolis Local Initiative Support Corporation up to my current position here with Sanair.
Thank you. And I am your moderator for this breakout session. My name is Gina Lewis Alexander. I'm the Executive Director of Oasis Christian CDC, located in Indianapolis, the Martindale Brightwood neighborhood. I've been the ED for the last 20-something years, and got into this business because, of course, affiliated with my church, Oasis of Hope Baptist Church, where the visionary and former pastor felt that the church should be outside the four walls, and therefore created a not-for-profit development corporation. Oasis has put in $17 million worth of real estate development in Martindale Brightwood, and are making sure that we are involved in most of the collectives in addressing the quality of life plans in Martindale Brightwood. So welcome, everyone. Hopefully our format is to share basic areas of housing accessibility, housing affordability, and then we will ask if you have some questions. I would also like to introduce to you my legacy and my daughter, Janae Lewis Manning, who has a professional certification in housing finance. And so Janae, will you come in and say hi? She's gonna monitor our chat room.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. So let's probably start with talking about housing affordability. And what does that mean? I guess I should say that we thought this was very important to address housing issues because, one, do people in Indianapolis know the ins and outs of navigating a housing project? Do residents understand how to access affordable housing? So we just kind of thought that's the platform we should start on. And maybe I see that we have a small group here. So I'm going to ask that if you can unmute yourself and share with us why you came to this particular breakout session. And I don't want to call anybody out, but I see you, Lena. I see you, Starla. I see you, Rochelle Gilbert. So you guys come on in and tell us, why did you come to this housing breakout session?
Thanks for not calling me out there, Miss Gina. Lena Hackett. I came to this breakout session because the work that we do is around what I always call soft side community development that always includes housing, but we're not a bricks and mortar kind of group. But housing affordability, access to housing is key to a lot of the work we do. So I am here to learn and figure out how we can adapt what we do to our new normal.
Thank you.
Hey, Gina.
Hi,
It's
Starla.
Rochelle. Good to
Oh,
see you.
Rochelle. Okay. Hi, Rochelle.
Hey. Really, I just ran across the program. I got an email about this program, and I'm always interested in trying to find out more information and on affordable housing. It's my passion. And so I don't work anymore within the Indianapolis or Indiana affordable housing area. I'm mostly based out of Texas, although I still live in Indianapolis. But just want to try and stay connected and hear as much information and any resources that are available that I may be able to pass on to someone.
Thank you so much. Starla.
Hello, everybody. Starla Hart, and I'm here really mainly today as a community connector. I don't directly work in housing, but I know it's vitally important to making sure families are stable. And so, so that's it, period. So I'm looking to hear the ideas, figure out how to be more supportive. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Starla. Miss Hope. Miss Tribble? No? Okay, Mr. Gary Reeder, how about you?
Hi, I am the board president for Riley Area Development Corporation. And I thought I would join this to learn and also see if there was any opportunities for Riley area to offer their resources to the community.
Thank you so much. Mr. Beverly, would you like to share?
Sure. I don't really have any connection to any, I guess, real organization or anything, but I just came just because I was interested in the subject matter itself. I do have dreams actually of trying to, I guess, unite my family to put together, I guess, a model, so to say, to where we can each own our own, I guess, residence, particularly through, I guess, multifamily, maybe to like where, we all put it together to own one and maybe build a model to share with other families. So just more just kind of like looking for like-minded people, looking for information, just looking to learn.
Thank you so much, Mr. Beverly. LaShonda.
I'm not really here representing anybody. I'm just visiting. I'm having lived in cities where actually there were large populations that lived in co-op housing. Being an artist and watching artists in general, because co-op models never changed for the arts community, because that's the only way artists have ever really been able to survive in regards to finding new insurance options and actually live work options. I'm really just curious like how people are thinking about that, because creating co-op models for live work housing, because artists typically cannot live in your regular house just because of the nature of the work. How are some of the funders and everyone else, as well as community rethinking when we talk about affordable housing? It's not always this kind of A-frame built out wooden thing, and where is the innovation and thinking about different models of ownership, and how does that look, as well as what does the structure look like? And just to be honest, when I lived in Chicago, I worked at the Chicago Department of Cultural Planning, and our work was around artist live work housing, where we actually wrote a book called Square Feet Chicago, The Artist's Guide to Buying and Leasing Space, which delved very heavily into alternative models of ownership. What did that look like, as well as looking at places where artists actually came together, bought warehouses, figured out the financing of pooling their resources together to then build those out correctly where they were safe live workspaces. Because a normal house is typically not safe for most artists.
Thank you so much. We'll be looking forward to your discussion. And Ms. Joyce Moore, would you like to come in? No? All right then, thank you so much. Again, welcome everyone to the housing breakout session. And we're gonna move forward with, let's talk about, wow, LaShonda, you really got my mind stirring there. Let's talk about affordability from this perspective of the developer side who's providing an affordability, and then also from the individual, the resident, the citizen who's trying to be able to afford a housing. So Mr. Hobbs, will you start us off there, please?
Yeah, sure. This term affordability, as you kind of alluded to, Jenna, it does mean something slightly different depending on who you're talking to. So in my world, as a Section 42 developer, housing developer, when we speak of affordability, it's relative to the Section 42 housing program, which is an IRS and HUD provision. And how they define affordability is that your income is 60% of the average median income or less. And in that context, as an example, here in Indianapolis, 60% average median income or less for, say, a single person or a senior is around that $34,000 or so or less. And so if you're making more than $34,000 as a one-person household, then you're not eligible or you're not considered eligible for an affordable housing rental unit. And so that's the context that we operate in. Now, there's layers of affordability. We talk about the 60%, but we go from 30, 40, 50, 60%. So what does that really mean? So in our context, it means that, hey, we will subsidize your rent for, say, in this case, a one-bedroom unit. We'll subsidize your rent accordingly. So if you're at a 30% average median income, right? Your rent approximately is going to be about $350 a unit for a really nice, new, beautiful apartment unit. A 60% average or 60% income person, average medium income person, your rent would be approximately, I say, around $600 or $650 per month. Whereas a market rate unit, say if you're above that, for that same apartment unit, it may be in excess of $850 to $900 a unit. Okay, so what we develop affordable housing, and we have to allow people to come in and meet those affordability kind of income constraints. And how we're able to do it is that we're able to get dollars here through tax credits by selling our tax credits to people like Keith Brotnex at Sanair and other organizations. They raise capital, they get benefit from our tax credits that we apply for and win these competitive rounds. We get the cash, and then we will develop a multifamily or a single family resident with cash that comes there from those investors. And then we have to adhere to all these compliance rules to make sure that we don't allow anyone to move in if they don't qualify.
Thank you. Leanne, can you share with us some of the things that over in the Rock Initiative in the Jewel catchment area, what have you done in terms of affordability for housing?
Sure, thank you. One of the things that we have done most recently is working with organizations like INHP to secure down payment assistance, as well as educate prospective homeowners on various programs that make it possible for them to receive credits for first-time home buyers. And so it reduces the cost that the individual will have to spend or have to acquire in terms of a mortgage for home ownership. And so it makes being a homeowner a more affordable option for individuals who may not have considered the possibility of owning their home. And so it's giving the opportunity for people to build wealth for themselves and for their family, to create some legacy in the neighborhood by creating opportunities for them to afford to be in their home, and then help them with educational resources, exposure to banking opportunities, as well as new neighbors. And so building some community stabilization so that they are also successful post-purchase for staying in their home.
Robert, can you share with us about, in terms of affordability, what can we do to help residents or homeowners already in their home with maybe homeowner repair or something like that? Robert, you're muted.
I know. There's a variety of things that we can do. One of the things as a community development corporation is we apply for grant funds that directly assist current residents, owners who own their homes, with grant funds from CDBG and maybe even some other sources to provide them with grant opportunities. And we're even bringing a construction manager to identify the need, to fix the problems, usually at no cost. In a lot of cases these days, some of that cost might be attached to their house as a lien against their house that could be forgiven over time, or forgiven at a point that they actually sell their houses. But there are other organizations around Indianapolis. I can't name a lot of offhand. I know we have a couple of team builders and things like that in our neighborhood who will go out and do work on individual houses. But it really requires that person to come forward and to look for those opportunities, because we can't readily identify those from the outside. Another thing that we do is we get volunteers together, and we pull people's talents together in order to assist homeowners in taking care of their homes, whether it's cutting grass, painting, fixing plumbing, fixing fans. I probably spend 10 hours a week doing that type of work, and I enjoy it thoroughly, because it's a lot cheaper than, and a lot less headache than me going after a CDBG grant. So I can do that a lot easier. But there's all kind of ways, but the homeowner really has to push out and seek those opportunities themselves. And a great place to start is contacting a local CDC or not-for-profit organization.
And so speaking of CDCs, but we also have intermediaries that help in terms of the housing industry. Mr. Broadnax, could you share with us on that from that perspective?
Yes. Good afternoon. SANAIR is an intermediary community development financial institution. What we do is that we raise affordable rental housing investment funds to invest in a program that Gary mentioned earlier called low-income housing tax credits. So we basically raise those investment funds, which allows developers such as BWI to construct a development and also provide enough equity so that they can charge a lot lower rents. One of the things that we're always watching about is affordability within our community and state. And there was a study called Out of Reach for 2019 that was done in Indianapolis, and it said that a person who would be able to afford a 2-bedroom a unit in Indianapolis, the market rent is a little over $900 a month. So the person would have to earn about $18 an hour or a little over $36,000 annually. But for a person who has area median income of 30% or less, the most that that family can afford is about $600 a month. And for just the state of Indiana in general, in order for someone in the state of Indiana to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in our state, they would have to work at a minimum wage that they would have to work 71 hours a week. And for a 2-bedroom in our state, they would have to work 88 hours a week to afford a market rate 2-bedroom unit. I mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program that develops this affordable housing. There were 5 developments that were awarded through our state housing agency, totaling 240 units. And out of that 240 units that were awarded that will be constructed sometime this year, only 133 of those were actual new units. The other developments were some in-place acquisition rehab. So out of a community of over 800,000+, we're going to net 133 new affordable units, which we're not close to meeting the need.
Mm-hmm. Those statistics are awesome. And then I think the other thing about being affordable, we also have to look at the word that everybody wants to cringe when you hear it, but when you think about affordability, then the word gentrification arises because you have elderly or folks who are living in current housing. And then if new developments come to that area or that neighborhood, then there's a question of whether or not the elders who have already lived there can afford the new tax base that will be created because of new housing. And so how do you maintain not only the affordability, but the maintaining of the homes that people have been in 30, 40 years? And so we have to look at the laws that are in place to help maintain affordability in some of the communities. Does anybody have a comment about that wonderful word gentrification? How do you feel about that?
There's so many emotions that are conjured with gentrification. I think personally, I'll just share that I think you have to be very intentional to continue to have a mixed income community. And so there can be benefits of gentrification because there is investment that's being made in the community. There is now awareness of the community. You don't have to, it kind of stops the decades of disinvestment that had been occurring. But again, you have to be intentional to mix the income so that those that have weathered the decades of disinvestment and continue to want to stay in that place can also reap the benefits of the new investment. And so to your point about legislation and the laws, I think we have to educate ourselves on what and who are our elected officials' philosophies so that we can make sure that our community is best represented by the laws that are used for revitalizing communities.
Yeah.
And not only Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say, for us, we're seeing a lot of change, and even for a house that might have sold for, and I'm thinking of actual cases, sold for $45,000 a year ago. We have a nice house next door that's sold for $270,000. So you have that kind of activity that goes on, and it gets real hard to fight that, other than through laws and different types of legislation. And for my part, I'm agreeing with Leah completely. We have chosen just to focus on the education piece, to get people educated as to how to build wealth, how to take care of their homes, how to stay in their homes, how to keep their homes, so that we can potentially create this mixed income neighborhood. But you have to be very, very intentional about it.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit this to as well, because I totally agree with what Robert said as well as Lee. If you think about the negative connotations of gentrification, it's usually, we have grandma in a situation here where some developer, certainly not me, but some developer comes in and buys her house for pennies on the dollar because she can't afford the property taxes, right? And then she's kind of forced out that way. And those are the negative implications there of gentrification. So education helps out with that, because if grandma knows that her house is worth $400,000, right, and somebody tries to offer her $100,000, then grandma can better negotiate and make sure that she walks out with a stash of cash, and then she wants to move somewhere else or whether she wants to stay, but at least she's getting real true market value for her home. So education is one way to combat that. I'll tell you another way that I think that the Flanner House community, through their quality of life plan, has combated it as well. We speak of Section 42 tax credit type developments. That is actually a strategic way to minimize gentrification. So what we're doing, we were awarded tax credits there right over there near Flanner House. It was part of the quality of life plan strategy, is to bring in some Section 42 single family home development. And the reason for that is that the property tax assessment on the developments that we primarily do are governed by a different law. So in other words, we're building a $200,000 home, right? And the rents are going to be, around anywhere ranging from $400 up to maybe $900 for a 4-bedroom home. And so, it's affordable for people, but more importantly, all of the other homes that will be developed in and around that area, now all of a sudden the property tax assessment is going to be based not on a $200,000 home value. The effective rate for a tax credit home will be about approximately half of that, because of the Section 42 home. So in other words, the property taxes in that area is not going to increase as high as it would if it were just a market rate home that was $200,000 or $300,000. So that is a very intentional strategy to allow grandma to be able to stay in that area without her property taxes skyrocketing. And she still gets the benefit of the value of her home increasing there as well. So that's just one example of the type of strategy here to minimize gentrification in that community. And, time will tell. We'll see, 3, 4, 5 years out how things look at that point in time. But we're pretty confident that that's going to minimize the negative gentrification effect along with education.
I think one of the other things, because you guys are really hitting it on the nail on the head, and I think just in listening to our keynote speaker, it speaks to a term that's talked about, community land trust or cooperatives that could somehow intervene in buying homes or buying property so that it still can be affordable for folks who wants to live in that neighborhood. And I know that has some controversial concerns as well, but it still is an avenue that maybe as developers and CDCs, Community Development Corporation, and neighborhood partners need to at least explore in order to make sure things stay affordable in their particular community. Janae, I don't know from a financial perspective, did you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of affordability products that may be available?
So not related to community land trust?
No, it does not have to be related to community land trust, no.
Oh, okay. The only thing as an educational piece is that as individuals are pursuing home ownership, that we encourage them to shop their mortgages. They get a 45-day window so that it's only one ding to the credit instead of multiple dings if you're shopping for a home mortgage. So utilize the banks, utilize community CDCs, utilize your credit unions to see what the best options are out there, because a lot of people have options that will enhance their buying power for low-income persons or individuals buying in low-income census tracts.
Thank you. And not to market anybody in particular, but I do want to make sure our community is aware that on every Saturday at the hour of 1 o'clock on 1310 The Light, you have Janice Bradley and Diana Rice Wilkerson, who have been talking about how you can access more affordable housing, and they are very much so willing to educate you onto that process, because truly it's a lot to navigate at this point. So are there any questions that we need to open up and put into our chat room? Janae is monitoring that. And I guess you can wave your hand. I guess there's a wave function. I'm still getting used to my Zoom, but just please know that you can ask questions along the way. I think Gary, Janae, can you read what Gary has indicated in the chat room for us?
Sure. He has stated that Riley area and Big Car created artist affordable housing, where the artist purchases 49% of a house in a community land trust, CLT, like situation, and where the affordability is maintained.
Thank you so much. So Gary, I guess some kind of way you and LaShonda are going to talk about, because that is very interesting, and not just for artists, for folks who probably cannot afford market rate, or they need some other kind of product to move from where they are to another level of responsibility. For example, Gary, can you talk about supportive housing for a minute?
Well, that's Gary Hobbs, right? Yeah.
Oh, well, Gary Hobbs, I want you to talk about affordable housing, but Gary Ryder, why don't you go ahead and talk about your project with Big Car?
Well, I think, we purchased, I think, 5 homes and in a partnership with Big Car, and resold them. I think we have 4 of the 5 homes, or 3 of the 5 homes sold now, where the artist purchases 49%. The artists are selected by Big Car. And the idea is we created a formula where if the artist ever wants to resell their interest, they do get some return of equity and capital, a profit on their ownership. But the structure is so when the house is resold, it's still going to be sold at an affordable rate. So it's sort of maybe one of the first experiments in Indianapolis to do a community land trust situation. The artist gets down payment assistance from Big Car. It's mandatory that they take the down payment assistance, and in exchange, they do volunteer at the Big Car facility for artist events to maintain the artist community.
Thank you for sharing that. Gary Hobbs, supportive housing.
Yeah, so permanent supportive housing, you remember I was talking about the 60% average median income and below. So typically when we're referring to permanent supportive housing, we're talking about on the very low end of it. So 30% average median income, maybe down to zero, because there are many homeless people that may not have any income, but believe it or not, there are some homeless people that still do have some income coming in as well, but it's typically below that 30%. So people making minimum wage and just slightly above minimum wage or whatever. And so what typically happens with the permanent supportive housing, there's two main big components to it. Number one, you have to have some additional subsidy to really make it work, like a Section 8 voucher or a project-based voucher. And so we work hard with our permanent supportive developments to make sure we have those subsidies in place, COC vouchers or project-based vouchers. The second part that distinguishes a permanent supportive housing project is there are wraparound services with it there as well. So those wraparound services, you know, if we're dealing with the homeless or with those with some type of addiction challenges, you know, we'll partner with people like Adult and Child and other many organizations out there that that we provide on-site support and spaces there for people to you know, have those type of counseling services available there to them. And our model as well with all of our developments is also linking in the faith-based community, because we fundamentally believe that if it's going to be a sustainable change, there is going to be a change in individual needs to be sustainable, and you really got to do it with the heart of a person and that kind of spiritual component. So we invite churches to be a part of that process of healing there, if you will, there with individuals in all of our developments. And so anyway, that's what permanent supportive housing is. Now we've taken it to another level. We did the very first single parent kind of semi-supportive housing development. It's up in Fort Wayne. We're looking to do one here in Indianapolis if any of my CDC partners have some land available to do that. But the one up in Fort Wayne is running, and it's 44 single parents, but it has that same wraparound service piece to it. And also we're providing project-based vouchers in partnership with the housing authority up there. So the cool thing about this, all those single parents are working on a certification or a degree to break that cycle of poverty. And I would say up in that development, we have probably 90% approximately of our residents are Black and brown. And I'm very excited about seeing their progress and breaking that cycle of poverty for themselves and their children.
I think it's important that we recognize that housing is such a pillar of our community and of every family. We know that if the housing is not stable within a family unit, then this can create ripple effects in all other areas of a family. For example, if a child is going to a certain school and their housing is not stable and mom or dad or the parents have to continuously move, then we know that this creates a disruption in the learning process of every children. So housing is very crucial to any component of the quality of life. And Lee, you probably can speak to this, especially as a faith-based entity in the housing that you guys have done over in that community off of 30th Street.
Definitely. We have to be mindful of the whole person, not just the physical health, but there's the spiritual health, the mental health, and just the whole community. And so as we work to create a quality place, we also want to make sure that we have a neighborhood that a family wants to stay, that there's quality education, that there is access to food, there is access to a health facility, as well as green space. And so there can be an opportunity for recreation and just to play. And so, yes, it is important that housing is stable, but part of that stability is that it's one of multiple places so that an individual can have all of their needs met, including the faith-based component. And so being able to address that heartstring that Gary was referring to and doing good work so that single parents double parent homes, individuals without children, all of them can have stability and a high quality of life. And so that is definitely the motive for the ROC initiative, which has multiple pillars, including housing, as a way to improve quality of life for individuals.
Yes, I know, and we having 70 units of senior housing in the midst of COVID. It has been very interesting. Sometimes seniors are not familiar with social distancing, and they like to congregate and talk. So it's in the midst of COVID, housing has also been very has been impacted, as well as sometimes you have younger family members who will depend on older family members for financial resources, housing, help with doing the laundry in their apartment. And so you have to look at the whole picture when it relates to housing, and not just always the affordability, but also what happens once housing is obtained. In talking about
COVID is definitely, sorry, I was just going to
Go
say
ahead.
COVID has definitely impacted property management procedures and protocols. I mean, we all are, as humans, we need touch and interaction, and so it's not just the seniors, but it is difficult to make sure that the laundry facilities or the common areas of those senior facilities are clean and safe, as we're encouraging people to maintain their social distance.
Robert, did you want to say something about that? You had a smile.
I'm all with Ed. I mean, we've been having so many issues with our housing as far as our seniors is concerned. That's been our main issue, just trying to keep them safe. We actually ended up moving benches out of common areas and out the hallway to keep them from congregating. So I'm glad it's warm now. We can get them separated out a little bit more outside. So that's going to help a whole bunch. But I mean, we're cleaning, we're doing all those things. And I think the additional COVID-19 piece has also been the fact that we have a significant drop in our rental income. So as a not-for-profit, or even as a profit organization with a Section 42, you still have to be able to manage and navigate that loss of income. That has proven to be a challenge, but we seem to be negotiating or navigating through that.
Right. Go ahead, Janae. I think we have somebody in the chat.
Yes. First, I would like to mention that LaShonda and Gary from Riley are sharing articles within the chat about trends in other areas and financing options for co-ops and multi-generational homes. Okay, and the question in the chat says, what are some of the most innovative housing models you've seen that generate community wealth, innovation in design, financing, and access that could be replicated in Indianapolis? And I think in that discussion, we should also talk about the challenges of working with the zoning committee and how some of these things are prohibitive in designing things like tiny homes.
Wow. As well as the neighborhood and how they feel about that type of housing.
The NIMBYism is real.
Go ahead, Gary.
Sure, I'll take a stab at some of that. I mean, yeah, and the jury is still out, but I'm sure we'll get some positive and maybe some negative feedback as well for what we're developing in Canal. It's called Canal Village. It was written up in IBJ about a month or so ago. But it's a modular product, which I think that is pretty innovative here for Indianapolis, because it's specifically for us, we're using shipping containers. And so it'll be a nice modern looking home, approximately a $200,000 type home, 4-bedroom home. But yeah, we have worked through the state and with the city, and we're expecting to start construction in July. So that'll be the first of its type. You will not know, you will have no idea there's a shipping container underneath it.
Right.
You just, if I showed you pictures of it, you'll just be like, oh, wow, I would have had no idea.
Yeah.
The key though here, especially here with some of the COVID things and and also scarce resources when it comes to construction, we're able to control a lot of the construction costs and variables by having it built within a manufacturing facility for majority of it, and then kind of integrated and assembled on site. We're also able to shorten the time that it takes. Now, one of the innovative things that we're looking at beyond the building design and you know, getting the community involved in different elevations and colors is that we're also looking to work here with new or smaller developers here on phase 2, where we are working to acquire some additional property and land to expand the number of homes that will be for sale, but at an affordable rate, which is also part of the strategy to minimize the negative impacts of gentrification. Putting the time and effort and costs into developing that product, other developers can come in and benefit from that that upfront cost that you would not have to bear, and be able to put another affordable product here in that community. And so to me, that's one creative thing. The other creative thing about that, it just so happens by design here, that community is an opportunity zone. So it opens up the possibility for others, you know, that don't have the big $10 million capital gains, like some of these big other insurance companies and Fortune 500 companies and banks. You know, if you have the tens of thousands of dollars of, because you may have sold your home or another real estate property, you're able to invest some of your money into this opportunity zone district that we're creating. And you can also benefit from the wealth of having no capital gains assessed after 10 years of your investment. So it's a way to build wealth here with your average middle class person here who really wants to jump into the real estate sector, and they may have one stock or two, or sold a house or a little rental property and accumulate a little bit of capital gains. Now you can reinvest it in a smart way. So there's a lot more. You'll be hearing a lot more about it, but I'd be more than willing to, you know, follow with others that are really interested in that another time.
Just out of curiosity, Keith, how do you feel as an intermediary that the financial institutions, how do they feel really in Indiana, Indianapolis, about innovative, creative housing that does not fit the normal matrix of how we do business here?
I think we've been open to it. When you look at ourselves and some of our other investors, there's a lot of different, when you look at how low-income housing tax credits were initially done, from just being a singular model to getting into the permanent supportive housing investment to what Gary's trying to do with the container homes, I think we're open to it. So some of the questions that we have, I think that were already brought up that we're concerned about is, are they going to be able to meet zoning requirements? A lot of the communities you work in have a very strict zoning requirements, so it makes it prohibitive to do this. The other thing that I'm looking forward to looking at this is that if you ask me as an investor, when I look at some of our deals that don't perform like they should, what is the main reason why they don't perform? And I will tell you that sometimes the operating expenses end up being higher. Now, I've looked at the container housing, and what I have found out is that if we can get that built and get a buy-in on that studies are showing that operating costs are going to come in lower, which makes this a lot more feasible and gives the developer a lot more flexibility in terms of the rents that are being charged. I'm all for this.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. And that I do think it's important, because I've seen some shipping container models of homes, and you really can't tell the difference. And the thing about it is, if you can get it, the structure of it made somewhere else, and it doesn't cost as much site, then that reduces the cost, and thereby reducing the cost to the person who's moving in and making it more affordable. So that would be awesome. Anybody else wanted to say anything? Do we have any questions at this time? One of the things I want to make sure is that we're just not talking and being preachy, but make sure we involved everybody in this learning process. Does anybody else have a question? Starla, are we answering your questions? I'm sorry, Janae, go ahead.
No, I was just I'm just looking at the chat, and I guess in terms of affordable housing, coming off of our our guest speaker from the lunch hour, is that as we speak of co-ops and co-op living, that LaShonda has mentioned that folks live in co-ops for a variety of reasons that are beyond cost, and that as we talk about affordable housing, we must do a lot of discussion, not just about the financing side, but of why cooperative living works. So it seems like she may be interested in telling us why cooperative living works in another session or in the future. So just a reiteration of what's going on in the chat.
LaShonda, go ahead.
No, but just in general, we are at a co-op webinar. So it just seems to me like a lot of our discussion should be rooted in, or at least I thought it was going to be rooted in, how are organizations creating co-op housing? What does that look like as people move into those spaces? Because in some organizations, those types of, what do you call it? I can't think. What do you call it? Multi-income, it exists because that is how the co-op is designed. And so people choose to live there and understand that they might be paying a little bit more to ensure that their neighbors who might not be able to pay a little bit, as that they can. So I just feel like if we're in a webinar about co-ops, digging into how is it that a living situation that is attached to co-ops is something that we really kind of should be exploring, because even those finance models in regards to who gives a mortgage for a co-op is not your average bank. There are some very similar particular banks that focus heavily on doing co-op funding, because it functions differently than this is my property because I only have a share of that property. And if you're living in a high rise, that looks different than if you're living in a whole block, and the block is considered the co-op. So I just think those kind of discussions would be valuable. I'm not sure if many of our speakers have ever done any cooperative housing, and if so, can they speak on how they've worked through that process?
So LaShonda, this is Keith with Sanair. We've invested in a co-op using low-income housing tax credits in South Bend. It's in a neighborhood in South Bend that's starting to see some gentrification, and the reason, and there are 24 single-family homes in a community. And what that developer is doing is it's a way for them that in an area that's gentrifying for them to maintain long-term affordability. So the model has worked. The difficult part of it has been trying to make sure the management of the cooperative board and making sure that they're following all the policies and really just being a stickler in terms of just running the co-op. But it's worked.
Thank
How
you.
do you finance that?
It was financed through low-income housing tax credits, and we have a really good community bank up in South Bend that did the permanent financing.
Okay.
I think your questions are very warranted, LaShonda. Just having been in housing for a little while, it's been my observation or my experience, and there are other experiences, that Indianapolis can be a tad bit conservative in terms of how, because they're looking for the impact that it will have not only on the community, but also on the investors. And so this is a new thing, because I was speaking with Lee and we had talked about the education of housing and how maybe we need to come together and really share with the community the navigation of housing, of the housing industry, and what it takes, and the knowledge that you have to possess, and the manpower that has to go into investigating what we need to do. Lee, did you want to speak on that?
I I honestly can't remember that exact conversation, but I do agree that there is a tremendous amount of education, and we are in constant learning mode. As recent as even our lunchtime speaker, I have not done a cooperative housing development. I have participated in conversations about community land trust and started to explore what that looks like, but I was definitely intrigued by the example in Atlanta of a cooperative coming together to help individuals purchase homes. And so it is an exciting opportunity, and I know that there are other resources. And so I'm looking forward to gaining education as well as encouraging others to continue to be educated on that process, because there are so many innovative opportunities. And I think that's the other benefit of COVID, is that it's pushing us to try and to learn so that we can do different things.
Ms. Moore, did you want to say something? Go right ahead.
Yes, it's interesting because we have a roadmap. We have a documented situation that worked and has worked. And that is with the Flanner House homes and with what they did back at Flanner House back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. My son is an urban planner, and he has spoken on 6 of the 7 continents about what they did at Flanner House. And this was one of the first times that sweat equity was involved, where they went and got money that was due them through the Veterans Association, Veterans benefits. And we have a roadmap. If you go to the Historical Society, all their financials, everything is there. All you have to do is plug and play. And I have talked to Brandon about that. And he and Justin has, you know, we have at our access a person that is an expert on that from right here, went to Shortridge. And we're just not utilizing that. And we had an opportunity to do that when he got the thing for the Fall Creek place. And we got bogged down by the city. And so we can't rely on the government or the city or traditional things. We have to think outside the box. And in doing that, we need to they have a bank black thing. We need to bank black. We need to build up our own things and then utilize all those skills, talents, abilities, and associations to do it for ourselves.
Ms. Moore, excuse me, can I interrupt you? I'm so sorry. This breakout session, we have really gotten into a deep, good conversation, and we have about probably 40 seconds left. I want to thank everybody really for coming to this breakout session. I will say that we need to thank KEFR for their allowing this platform to exist, and it is being recorded. And I think if you have any further questions and or inputs on maybe how we can, as a community of Black and Brown, do more economic development and sustainability for ourselves, let's get together and do this. I want to thank you all for participating. And Rasul, are you listening?